So a few days ago, Milestone did a Q&A about MotoGP 23 on Discord. And today I decided I'd go through and analyse what was said during that Q&A. Now yesterday they actually released the full video of it, so I will leave a link to that in the description. They also did a summary of it, but to be honest, the summary is pretty vague and misses out quite a lot of the important things as far as I'm concerned. So I've actually gone through, pretty much typed out everything that was said during that Q&A, and then I've gone through and reworded it. So the stuff on the screen, it's not direct quotes of what was said, but it is effectively what they said. I've just reworded bits to make them make more sense, or just cut bits out that were kind of irrelevant. But if you actually go and watch the video, you'll know that they did say these things, so it is all accurate information that I'm bringing. It's worth noting that this Q&A was with the lead game designer Stefano Zanaboni, or Zanaboni, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, I do apologise for that one, and the executive producer and creative director Michele Coletti. So you'll see with the stuff that I put on screen that I've labelled who was speaking and when. But we'll get straight into the first question now then. And the first question is, what can you improve on your bike in this new career mode? So Zanaboni said, we've completely redesigned the way you develop the bike. It now depends on your status within the team and manufacturer. For example, if we think about Bagnaia, he's the lead rider for Ducati. He must develop the bike starting from choosing the spec of bike to go with. So depending on your status, you'll have different things to do, and you'll have to communicate which area you want new development packages to arrive. The choice of the player will define which bike they use in the remaining part of the season. And then Coletti added on to that, obviously, we must work within the real regulations because in MotoGP you cannot update everything you want. So we stick to which components the manufacturers are allowed to develop, but we've also changed the way that you get access to the new parts. We've been inspired a lot by what happened last season with some Ducati riders in satellite teams that were given update packages mid-season. In MotoGP 22, you control the resource development and moving engineers around like a managerial career. This time we've made it something very different. It blends with the concept of turning points. At some point during the year, you'll be presented with a turning point. Win or lose, achieve or do not achieve. It's more in the shoes of a rider and less about a team manager or engineer because we wanted to focus the player into the life of a rider. So from that then, we can take that the R&D system is completely different, which is great because it's got a bit stale over the last few years. Obviously, it's been pretty much the same since MotoGP 19, MotoGP 20. Obviously, 20 was when they introduced a managerial career, where it's been identical since then. But it does seem now that the manufacturer will come to you and say, you've got this new aero update, you need to get this result to get it, or something along those lines. Again, they were being fairly vague with it, obviously they don't want to give too much away, but that's kind of the impression that I get from it, which is great, because it's much more realistic. You don't get sort of Bezecchi sitting there in the garage saying, oh, well, you need the engineers to go and work in this department, or, go and work in this department. He's just told by Ducati, wow, if you keep leading this championship, you will get some new aero updates the same time Bagnaia gets them. So I think that'll actually be really, really cool. Also, it'd be nice to see if it's visually different. But again, they haven't said that, so I probably wouldn't put your hopes up too much. But they might just come to you and say, oh, we've got this update. If you get a top 5 in this race, you'll get it for the next one. Moving on to the next question about career mode. What kind of interactions can you do in the social media part of the career? So Coletti said, the social media part is something we implemented to support the rivalries feature. During the season, you will build up different relationships with different riders, close to you in either the standings or in battles on track. Some of them will interact with you on the social media to trigger a challenge. You can decide to give different answers to trigger this challenge and to bring on the rivalry in one way or another. This is again inspired by real life, where sometimes riders interact on the socials in a way that's meant to intimidate or challenge the others. Zanaboni then said, I just want to add that the relationship between the player and the rivals will have an effect in races and in sessions throughout the weekend. If you answer your rival in a positive way, your relationship will improve and they'll be less aggressive with you. The same thing with a bad relationship. If you have a bad relationship with someone in the roster, they'll be more aggressive during qualifying and the races. Coletti then went on to say, this time the AI have this feature modelled separately from the level of difficulty, so you can expect to have some riders that are more aggressive, and this trait can be exaggerated or toned down depending on your choices. So that's probably the most we've heard about the social media part so far. It seems like really it's just something they've added so that you can access this rivalries feature. It seems like they're really pushing this narrative that you're going to have rivalries. Obviously, if you've seen all the trailers and stuff they've released, they've really pushed this sort of Bagnaia-Quartararo rivalry from last year. They're using that real-life season, those two obviously going for the championship, trying to put that into the game in a proper way where you're going to be able to interact with the different riders and they're actually going to be a bit more aggressive with you. Now, to be honest, I don't know how well that's going to work because, of course, in MotoGP game, the AI are all pretty aggressive. They'll all send it on you given the opportunity, or even if they're not given the opportunity, they'll still send it. So I'm not sure you'll necessarily notice this too much, but maybe we'll see. Maybe they will do some outrageous things if you're really rude to them, and perhaps if you're very nice to them, they'll be pretty passive on track. So that probably is the way to go. Make them a bit more passive because they're already way over the line with some of their overtakes, so that might be the way to go, but you never know, they might be just pulling off some ridiculous passes if you insult them on social media. Then there was a question about the team performances and the R&D. Are the differences between teams less at the start of the career, and do the AI teams develop their bikes? Now this was a bit of a strange one because they didn't really answer the question at all, but Coletti did say this. In MotoGP 23, the career starts the debut season, a purpose-built short season in Moto3 where you'll be gradually introduced to the new features and the structure of the career mode. We're still working on the team performances because we've only seen a handful of races, but we plan to represent the differences as much as possible, like in real life. So I'm going to assume from that, no, that AI teams don't develop their bikes because he just didn't answer that part of the question. And in fairness, for me, that was the main part of the question. But he did say that obviously the team performances are going to be realistic. Again, you kind of expect that one. But probably the most interesting thing he did say that the Moto3 season is a purpose-built short season. So you're actually probably not going to do the full season of Moto3, which is an odd choice. It's similar to something they used to do in the old games where you had like a couple of wildcard events in Moto3, but then you used to have a full Moto3 season after that. Like you might have a couple of wildcard events, depending on how well you did in those, you then got different offers from different teams when you actually got to Moto3. But it seems like now you'll just hop into Moto3, maybe just do a few races, and it seems like just be introduced to the new features, obviously the new social media, the R&D. I don't really know how R&D will work because I don't particularly bring updates throughout the year in Moto3, but I guess we'll see. But you'll be introduced to these new features, and then you move on. So, I actually didn't put this in the quote, but he did say, and then you move on. So it sounds like you do move from Moto3 straight up to Moto2 after just doing a few races, which is a strange choice, but I suppose that does help you get through the career a bit quicker. So that was pretty much everything to do with career mode. They then moved on to talking about the sprint races and obviously different parts of the format. So any information on the sprint races? Zanaboni said, we've updated the new race format for MotoGP and introduced the sprint races for the MotoGP class. For all lower classes, we're going to introduce the quick start procedure, so everything is updated to the new race format Dorna introduced this year. So that's actually a pretty interesting point that he says there. Of course, sprint races, I kind of expected they would be there, but it's nice to have confirmation that they're going to be there, because obviously we have seen in the past that features have been missing, or when SBK came out, the sprint races didn't work properly. They worked like a qualifying session. You were ranked by the fastest lap throughout the race, which was very, very bizarre. So it's good to hear that they actually prioritise it, so it should be working. But probably something that's a bit hidden in that quote is actually the quick start procedure. And I think this does get mentioned later when they're talking about the flag to flag, but it does sound like dynamic weather is going to be a thing for all of the classes. But if you're in Moto2 and Moto3, you actually get a red flag and then the race will be restarted. So that's actually pretty interesting. Probably the main thing from that quote for me. But there you go then, we also know we're going to get sprint races for MotoGP 23. So on to a question about the multiplayer now, and that is, will we be able to see our online racing stats on a public profile? Zanaboni said, in MotoGP 23, we're introducing a new feature called Live GP, and this is the first time we have ranked races in MotoGP. Every race and all statistics of the player will be recorded in a page that you can view after the race. Coletti then added on to this, say, Live GP is much more than this because the core of Live GP is a set of races that are scheduled along the week. So at fixed times you'll be able to join and enter races and be matched according to your ranking and play with players of your level. It's something that promotes fair and compelling racing because there's a fixed time and occasion that shouldn't be wasted, and being matched against people of the same level is something that's important to keep the challenge even and to a high level. This is something we've needed to do because improved online play has been something you've been requesting for a long time. So that actually sounds really cool. Obviously you get to see stats, that's great, that's always nice to see, but to be honest that's not really a massive thing for me anyway because, well, you've seen on MotoGP 22, you can't get a lobby online anyway. I've barely played any online, which is really a shame because you guys love the online videos, I love making the online videos, so hopefully this will spur on online a little bit more. But the most interesting thing that he does mention here, or that is mentioned here, is that there's going to be sort of weekly races or daily races, it seems like. There's going to be a fixed time, a fixed day, a fixed hour, and there's going to be a race at a specific track that you can go and do. And it sounds a bit like Gran Turismo to me, where there's sort of weekly races in Gran Turismo, sort of you'll do it, and maybe like every half an hour there'll be a race at a set track, set car. Obviously in MotoGP it'll just be a set track because obviously you probably can pick whatever bike you want. Maybe it will be set bike, I don't know. It'll probably just be balanced performance, so you can pick whatever bike you want. But there'll probably be set track, set conditions every like half an hour or every hour, or at these fixed times there'll be a race at Kota, this one at Le Mans, something like that. Obviously we don't know 100% how it's going to work, but that actually does sound pretty cool. So it's going to be ranked races, so you'll be against people of the same ability. They're hoping that the racing will be clean, but it is the MotoGP game. I mean, let's be real, even the esports is not clean, so you're never going to get that clean racing, but we'll see. We'll see how it works, but it does sound like a good feature. I'm quite intrigued. I'll perhaps be doing videos every time there is a weekly race or whatever. I guess we'll see when the game comes out, but I really hope that this does invigorate the online, because online was very dead in MotoGP 22, and it'd be really good to see this improve for the next one. So then there was a few questions about dynamic weather after that. Obviously, probably the biggest feature they've added as far as most people are concerned for this game. And the first one of those was, is dynamic weather / flag to flag available in online races? And in response to that, Zanabunny said, for sure, we have also implemented it into online races, so players will have the opportunity to make flag to flag races online. That's great because obviously in the past we have seen features that have been available in single player not be put into online. Not so much with the MotoGP game, in fairness, it's more of a ride thing, like they had qualifying in single player but you couldn't do it online, things like that. But it's good to see that they have actually put flag to flag online, because I kind of thought they might not, because there's already the restrictions online with the number of AI that you can have in a lobby and things like that. But sounds good. I think flag to flag races with other players will be really, really ridiculous, and hopefully again this does just promote the online a little bit and we can actually have some really good racing online with other players. So on to the next question about flag to flag then. We got, in the flag to flag, can you choose to stay out like Binder in Austria 2021, or do you have to pit? And Coletti said, yes, you can do the Binder style, absolutely, if you can manage it. You must start on the tyres according to the actual regulations, so if it's dry you must start with the slicks, and if it's raining and declared wet, you must start on the wet tyres. When the pit is opened you can enter and swap the bike, but you can choose to avoid this. We also had to train the AI to change the bikes on different laps. The AI could decide to swap a bit early, just in time, or a bit late. We did this to try and have different strategies during the flag to flag. It's very nice because sometimes you can see the AI being in big trouble when they swap late. You were right to ask for this because it's super fun to play. So what he's alluding to at the end there, I think, is the fact that we've been requested flag to flag for so long, they finally put it in, and they're like, yeah, this is actually a really fun feature, as difficult as it was to implement, it's really fun. So that's good, it sounds like it's going to be fun. Obviously, the people that make the game are not going to say, oh, it's rubbish, so you kind of have to have it with a bit of a pinch of salt. He says it's super fun, but I guess we'll be the judges of that when we actually get the game. But there you go, you don't have to pit if you don't want to. Now, it's actually shown in the trailer that you could do that anyway, with Bagnaia stays out and decides not to pit and then gets sat up by Digi and ends up running off the track. But that will be pretty interesting to try, to see if you can actually stay out. I imagine it'll be very, very difficult. I imagine the temperatures will be really, really wonky. I think it'll be one of those things where either it's really just difficult and you have to pit like earlier than the AI, I would say, because of the lack of grip, or it's super easy and you can just stay out every time. I don't think it's going to be very balanced, especially with it being their first time, because usually you just have two different physics sets. You've got dry or wet, but this is the first time where you're going to probably just have one set of physics, I imagine. Maybe it does change based on the tyres. Maybe the wet tyres, wet physics are a bit different, but you've never had the ability to use a slick in the rain, so it'll be interesting to see what the grip level's actually like, whether you can actually manage it. He claims it's pretty difficult, but again, we'll have to find that out when the game comes out. But it's pretty cool that you can do the Binder strategy, and I'm sure that will be a video that we make at some point. Can we stay out in the wet conditions? So the next question that they did actually ask was already sort of answered in the previous one, because they alluded to the fact that if it's wet you have to start on the wet tyres, but then you can pit. But will there also be wet to dry races or just dry to wet? And Coletti said no, there are both. Obviously we can't do it in 3 lap races, it only happens after 5 laps. It'd be impossible to do it in 3 laps because there's no time to swap the bikes. And Zanaboni added on top of that, I just want to add one more important thing, that dynamic weather is for the whole weekend, not just in races. So the strategy for the race starts in free practice, as the player can prepare the second bike for wet conditions during the free practice. So that's actually pretty interesting to note, because to be honest, until he said that, it wasn't even something that had crossed to my mind particularly. I had thought about, obviously, if you had wet track, that it obviously continues to dry up. So if you have wet track Q1, it's probably dry by the time you get to the end of Q2. But I hadn't really considered the fact that like, maybe you're in FP1, it's dry, the heavens open, it starts to rain. I hadn't really thought about that. And as well, something I hadn't really thought about was preparing the second bike. That, like, they did say as well that you could put a setup on the second bike, so you could actually put a different setup on, which again is something I hadn't thought about, mainly because I don't use setups, but it's just something I hadn't even considered at all. And yeah, there you go, there's actually a lot of strategies to this. It's not just about when do you pit in the race, you know, how long do you leave it. It's also about setting your bike up beforehand to make sure it's got the wet setting on, to make sure it's correct, make sure it's comfortable. Probably try the tyres, I guess in free practice, you know, if there's a bit of rain, you can see how well the different tyre compounds work, so you can have everything decided for when you actually change during the race. So there's actually a lot of strategies to this. I'm hoping that the flag to flag happens regularly enough where it actually is useful, because I know that it's one of those features where it can't happen too much because that would be too unrealistic, but also you want it to actually happen sometimes, otherwise it's like a feature they've added and it barely happens. So that's my worry, is how often will the flag to flags happen. But hopefully when they do happen, there will be a lot of strategy to it with these different aspects. So the next question then was also about the tyres, with any information on asymmetric tyres. Coletti said, we're sticking to what's really happening with the tyre manufacturers. as in reality they don't have the full choice of the symmetric or asymmetric compounds at all tracks. Basically, the manufacturers bring tyres decided for the track. For example, Sachsenring absolutely needs an asymmetrical tyre because there's a long left-hand succession of corners, whilst in other tracks there's no need. So yes, we mimic what the tyre manufacturers do, we bring asymmetric tyres where needed. So then, there's going to be asymmetric tyres in the game. I'm actually not sure whether it probably was a thing already. Now, it was never explicitly said, but because he says that they mimic which tyre compounds are brought to each track, it could very well have been a feature before. Like, your soft tyre might just have a harder left-hand side at Sachsenring than it does at Catalonia, for example, and you wouldn't know there was a different tyre because it'd just still be called the soft. So it could potentially be something that's in the game already, but if it's not, it's definitely going to be something that is in the next game. Of course, if you think to Superbike 22, there was actually different tyre compounds for each track as well, like you get different development tyres each round, so the functionality is already there. That's what made me think that maybe it was already there in MotoGP 22, and we just wouldn't know because it probably wouldn't tell you it was an asymmetric tyre. Probably just, this is the soft this weekend, this is the medium this weekend, this is the hard this weekend, because usually that is the choice that you've got, the three, and they just vary what those tyres are every weekend, I suppose, with the compounds. I imagine that most tracks, they are the same, but obviously with some specialised circuits like Sachsenring he mentions, you do need an asymmetric tyre, so that's going to be something in MotoGP 23, but like I said, it could very well have just been something in MotoGP 22 that we didn't notice because it's not explicitly said. It just, that's the soft, that's the medium, that's the hard. Sometimes it might be asymmetric, sometimes it might be symmetric, and I guess you just don't know. So moving on to one of the most important features of the game, the AI. Obviously, we've already mentioned them a little bit earlier with their aggression, but a bit more about their actual speed. Will the AI be more consistent over different tracks? Coletti said, "We'll always try to do our best for the consistency and speed of the AI. We're currently still working on the final touches. I think we've improved both the speed and consistency of the AI. We've also added some other features like the level of aggressiveness. I think every year we're trying to improve what's available, but we also plan to support the game after day one to take on your feedback and ideas. So it's very important for you to be here and communicate with us." Then the community manager said, "So it's safe to assume that AI will be a challenge this year." And Coletti said, "Yes, also because it reacts to your choices in the career mode and your level of relationship with different riders. There are also different traits for some riders that are notoriously more or less aggressive, so it's fair to say it's going to be a tough, challenging and interesting." So it does seem like they're really trying to push this sort of aggression, relationship, I guess rivalries is one of the big features, and behind the scenes there's probably a lot of effort to put in. You know, I can tell you that sounds like it's going to be a difficult feature to implement, so that's probably why I'm sort of bringing it home. But like I said, I think it is one of those things that will be hard to notice on track because the AI are already so over the line, so aggressive as it is, or some tracks are just completely, you know, not aggressive. It's very strange. Some tracks are really aggressive, some tracks are actually a little bit less. So it will be interesting to actually see how that works. Obviously, will you notice if they're more aggressive? Probably not, because they're already so strange, but I guess we'll see. But it is interesting to say that some riders will be more aggressive and some will be less. I imagine Marquez will be more aggressive, Vinales probably less aggressive, for example. But if you take away the aggression and relationship that they keep talking about, and actually look at the fact that they said they're going to improve on the AI based on what we say, and that's probably also for other features, I imagine, so they're going to actually take on the user's feedback, which is good because it seems generally like they have this year. They've actually implemented flag to flag, which we've always wanted. There's also some physics improvements that we're going to talk about in a minute that they seem to have implemented that we wanted. They've also obviously improved the AI. Well, they're saying they've improved the AI. Obviously, we won't know till we've played the game. But to me, it actually does seem like MotoGP 23 is a step in the right direction. But of course, we won't know till we've played it. But it does seem like they're listening to the community, and it seems like they're going to continue to listen to the community. And hopefully they won't go back on the word. Hopefully they actually will keep updating the game with things that we say after the game is released. So on to the final question that I wrote down then, and that's about the physics. Obviously, like I said, there was a physics improvement question. Could you tell us something about the physics improvements? And Coletti said, "It's easy to overlook with all the new changes we've been able to put into the game, but obviously we've also worked on the physics. First of all, we've worked on when you downshift and use a lot of rear brake. We've made this behaviour more realistic and more consistent. Then we've worked on some very complex aspects like the gyroscopic forces. When you're cornering, there are some forces that keep the bike upright or lean down, and when you interact with the gas on the corner exit. We wanted to better represent this situation. You'll feel the bike pushing outside the corner, all the horsepower pushing hard and trying to force the bike upright when exiting the corner like the rocket it is. Also, we've worked on the grip simulation. Wobbles, power drifts, some heavy braking are more reliable. Something you can trust more is the front end of the bike, and in some situations the rear end. You feel like you're in control and can pull off something that last year was very hard to see or to control. It's difficult to say in words, but when you have the joypad in your hands, it will be much clearer." Now, he pretty much just listed everything that people had problems with in MotoGP 22 and said they've sort of worked on them, which of course they're going to, because again, like, they obviously have seen what the community has said, and it's just a fact that these things were a problem in MotoGP 22, and I'm sure the developers were aware of that. but I suppose when you've got a yearly franchise like MotoGP, it's difficult to work on these things. They probably weren't happy with the way MotoGP 22 came out, but that's what they had to leave. They had to go on to the next project. But obviously the most important things they say here are about obviously the rear brake and the down the gears, because it was just so strange. The rear would just come around for no reason. It pushed the front into the corner as well. The rear just was bizarre. The front was just really weak, and then the rear just behaving oddly made it even worse. So the rear would push the front into the corner, or would try and overtake the front into the corner because the front was so weak. And then they talk about the grip, which obviously was part of that as well. So when you're trying to actually brake heavily, the rear would just come out for no reason. You couldn't really slide the bike coming out of corners properly either, and it seems like they have improved that one. It was a little bit confusing what they actually said. Obviously, like I said, I have reworded some of the quotes and things to make them make more sense. But he was saying that you could trust more the front end of the bike, and he was like, in some situations the rear was more stable, but then it's also not. So it was a little bit confusing to what he meant to that, but then he sort of said you feel more that you're more in control than you were last year, and you can actually do something that you couldn't do last year. So it sounds like they've sort of taken the major problems and tried to fix them. Obviously, like he says in the last sentence, it is difficult to describe the physics. It's difficult to prove that you definitely have changed it, but I guess we'll just find out when we actually get into the game and see what it's like. But that's pretty much everything that I thought was of note from the Q&A. Like I said, I pretty much typed up everything that was said and then reworded some of the sentences to make them make sense. So I just swapped some of the words around, or like I cut out extra parts. Obviously they're talking in a language that's not their native language, and they've got to try and come up with on the spot what to say. So it's not direct quotes like I said before. I just want to make that clear. But again, like I said, if you go and listen to the actual Q&A, which I recommend you do, you'll see that they do say all this stuff. Like, this is how it's structured as well. I've just maybe swapped a few words around here and there. It's not completely changed. It is generally what they said. It's just, like I said, made more sense and condensed a little bit so that I can actually put it on the screen. Milestone themselves did that as well on their actual page, but theirs is not as detailed as mine, so I wanted to actually use the quotes that I'd typed up, because it took me quite a long time to actually sit there and dictate everything that they did say in that half an hour. But I hope you did enjoy that video. Let me know, are you looking forward to MotoGP 23? This actually has filled me with a bit more optimism. I've been a bit cautious up to this point, but it does sound like they've really taken on board what we've said and are trying to fix the game. Again, you won't know till we've got the game what it's really like, but I fall into the trap every year. Obviously, I always look forward to the MotoGP game, but this year it does feel a little bit different. If you are new to the channel, please do like the video and subscribe, because this is where you're going to get all the MotoGP 23 news, MotoGP 23 gameplay when it comes out, MotoGP 22 gameplay in the meantime, GP bikes. If you like bike racing content, this is the channel to be. But I hope you did enjoy the video. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you in the next one.